Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're so happy to have you guys here. We're going to jump into a time of worship followed by a message from Pastor Joel. We're just going to take a few minutes to wait for more people to join. And while we're waiting, we wanted to share a few announcements of some upcoming things we've got going on at The Miz.
Now, we men have a box in our brains that most women are completely unaware of. This particular box has nothing in it. In fact, we call it the nothing box. And of all the boxes a man has in his brains, ladies, our nothing box is our favorite box.
Your name is life. Your name is hope inside me. Hope inside me. Your name is love. A love that always finds me. Always finds me. Your name is life. Your name is hope inside me. Hope inside me. Yeah. Your name is love. A love that always finds me. Always finds me. Yeah. So be lifted up. We lift you up. Be lifted higher, higher, Jesus. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher, higher, higher. Come sit on our throne and praise Jesus. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher, Jesus. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Whoa. Be lifted up, Jesus. All for you, Jesus. Be lifted higher. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Worthy Jesus, highest praises. Be lifted up. Worthy Lord. Be lifted higher. Worthy Jesus. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Praise you, Jesus.
Thank you, Lord. You can all have a seat. I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward for a time of offering. This is a time where we get to, as a church, as a family, pray and consider how God is asking us to give sacrificially, financially. We know that tithes and offerings is one of the many spiritual disciplines, and like all the other spiritual disciplines, it actually calls something of us in a spiritual sense. It's not just giving of our money. It actually challenges us to trust God in a much deeper way, in ways that we depend on money throughout our lives. The giving up of that is actually a very profound act of sacrifice, of worship, and of trust. And so this is just a time to consider how God is asking you to do that. And we always ask to only ever give out of a joyful heart, never out of a feeling of guilt or obligation, but out of a joyful heart as the Spirit leads. So go ahead and pass those bags around. And you can also give online.
Good morning. Today's reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 1 and 2, and 11 to 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one who Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and you and your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I've seen the Lord." And she told them that he had seen these things to her, or said these things to her. This is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Emery. I'm going to pray, and then we'll jump in. Heavenly Father, thank you that we do get to have fun, and you're the God of fun, you're the God of love, you're the God of joy and hope. You're also Lord over our sorrows, over our fears and tears, over our hopes and our dreams. And so, Lord, right here in this moment, just like that little one, we are crying out, whether you can hear us or not, looking for everything we need in you to keep moving forward, to live a life faithfully, following you. So may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you. Amen. So every once in a while, news comes that can change everything about how we see or understand or relate or live into reality. A news that can change everything about everything. Here's an example. Back in 2004, 10-year-old Tilly Smith got on a plane with her family in England, and they flew to Thailand to have a Christmas holiday playing on the beaches and enjoying the sunshine there. And on Boxing Day, Tilly was playing in the sand along the seashore, just like everybody else that was that day at their resort. And Tilly noticed something that nobody else did. She noticed that the waves were behaving unusually. The waves coming in were crashing up against the waves going back out, and it was creating this frothing and gurgling at the edges of the water. Now, Tilly had just learned something in school, so she ran to her parents to tell them what she saw happening in the waves. And her parents heard this, and they took her over to the lifeguards so she could tell them. Now, Tilly had learned that these were the signs of an oncoming tsunami. And the lifeguards heard this and were faced with a decision. Is this 10-year-old little girl a reliable witness? Because if they listen to her, they may be nothing, and they may ruin the holidays of hundreds of people that are there, that paid all kinds of money to be there. But if she's right, what else might happen? And of course, some of you will remember what happened that day. Within hours, wave after massive wave came crashing into seashores all around the Indian Ocean. Not just Thailand, but India and Indonesia, even all the way down in South Africa. They felt the force of this earthquake happening on the ocean floor that created this tsunami. And it caused death and devastation and destruction on really an unimaginable scale. Over 230,000 people died in that tsunami. But not on Tilly Smith's beach. On Tilly Smith's beach, hundreds of lives were saved because those lifeguards listened to the testimony of a little girl and believed her, and they cleared the beaches. They watched from safety as all of the waves came crashing in, but every one of them thankful that they were safe because Tilly had spoken up and told them. She maybe didn't know much, maybe not everybody would have listened, but they listened that day and it saved their lives. See, news can come that really it changes everything about everything, how we see and how we relate to our reality. See, 3 years ago, the news feeds were full of all this information about this deadly virus that was making its way around the globe. And that news, it just changed everything about how we live and how we work and how we worship together, how we travel and spend holidays or don't. We're still figuring out life on the heels of this thing that came into our life, the thing that filled up the news feed. See, powerful news changes things powerfully. So we don't get to choose the news, We only get to choose our response to it. See, what if they didn't listen to Tilly Smith's news on the beach that day? How many more funerals? How many more grieving families? How many more lost opportunities? Now, over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at the news in this chapter that Emery read from, John chapter 20. In light of the first Easter, there is news that comes that changes everything about everything. And 13 times, when you read through that chapter, you'll see 13 times John tells us what the disciples see and then how they respond to it. It reshapes their life. They go from hiding in their home, in this place where they're locked up in lockdown, and then they boldly go out into this hostile world to announce the news that changes everything, everywhere, for everyone, forever. And the news, like it does every Easter, it comes to us again today. It comes to the young and to the old, or the black and the white, or the young in our faith and the old in our faith. And every Easter we are challenged again with how we integrate this news into our lives, into our being, who we are and how we live. And it is supposed to change everything about everything. And there's a promise tucked away at the very end of this chapter. The last verse in this chapter says, "These are written," all these stories about Jesus, the news about Jesus, everything. "These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." And every time the news comes, we are challenged with this. Do we believe it? And if so, this life comes. Now what? See, here's the news that we're being challenged to consider. It's not just that the tomb that Mary goes to, not just that it's empty, that Jesus is raised from the dead. It's the implications that flow out from there for every single person everywhere, all time, all space. John never even really names them directly in the chapter, except for that we'd have life. Instead, he's dropping hints all the way through about what this means for us. And it begins in the first verse of the chapter, the first verse Emery read. He points out all the little things that tell us everything has changed for everyone, everywhere, forever. And so in verse 1 it says, "Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark." And that's supposed to be a memorable clue to what's happening. That first verse takes us back to the very first verses of the Bible in Genesis 1. On the first day of the first week, while it was still dark, God speaks, "Let there be light," and there is a light that shines and pierces the darkness. And John is saying that what happens in the garden that day is just very similar to what happened in the very first day, that God has hit a reset button on all of creation and everything is being made new again. The tomb is empty and the light of the world is risen. He has come back to life and is bursting forth into this brand new creation. And you get another clue again when Mary is crying in the garden. And this mystery man is there, and he's speaking to her. He's asking her, "Why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" And it says, she thinks he's the gardener. And it's another clue about the story of a gardener in his garden. This time in Genesis 2, where the first man, Adam, is the gardener gardening in the brand new creation, bringing new life out of the earth in the pattern of God when he created. John wants us to know that Jesus is again the first new man of this first new creation. This one is perfect. This one will endure forever. There's no sin and no broken in this one. And we can join him in it. John wants us to know this, that the tomb of death has given way to new life. And so all around us, everywhere, there might be other tombs that are still full of the things that we've lost, the things that cause us grief and sorrow and mourning. And yet this tomb is much like a womb. New life bursting forth in glorious day, that even while it's still dark, there's nothing that can overcome this life, nothing that can extinguish it or kill it. And John's promise is that if you believe this news, you too get this life in you. That only Jesus, Son of God, can conquer death. Only Jesus the Christ is powerful enough to get up and walk out of the grave on his own. Only Jesus will come to us in our sin, our grief, and in our death, and offer us the life that heals and resurrects. It is big, bold news. It is supposed to change everything about everything. It is supposed to change how you live, how you think, and how you see reality and respond to it. And so now what? Every Easter, we get to ask, how do we live into the new creation that is unfolding before us, even while we live with the shadows of the old lingering around us? That even while there's one empty tomb, there are so many others that are still full of broken dreams, old hopes, old fears, old love, old relationship, old desires, things we've lost. And so we ask, now what? And in the chapter, John kind of gives us binary responses, two opposing ends that we can choose one way or the other. And the first one is in his words to Mary, when she grabs onto him and she's hugging him and holding him for all she's worth. And he just says this very, very simple sentence to her. Don't hold on to me. See, Jesus knows that there's more to come, that this thing is just getting started. And so you can't get stuck clinging to, holding on to the here and the now. You can't get stuck clinging to the past and what was and what has been. You have to be ready for what is coming next. And see, for Mary, we know some of her story. We know that she'd have all kinds of reasons to want to hold on, to want to cling to him and go back to what was before Good Friday ruined all of it. See, what we do know about Mary is that at some point before she encounters Jesus, she was possessed by 7 demons. And whatever it is you believe about the demonic or demons or demon possession, I think what we can all agree on, anybody could agree on this, that what it meant for Mary is that life would have been unbearable. That spiritually, socially, psychologically, physically, there would have been unending torment in her that she could not escape no matter what. And it would have pushed her outside of anything normal, any sense of community, any sense of family, any sense of purpose, joy, worship, fun. She lived on the fringes or outside of all of that. And I think that's something that we got a taste of 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when the world went into lockdown, we experienced some kind of isolation and separation and the fear and the worry, not knowing what's coming, what's next for anyone, anywhere. And for Mary, one day a man came along who noticed her, who cared for her, who could heal her. And for Mary, all of a sudden, life is restored. All of a sudden, she has friends again. She has health again. She has vitality and purpose and hope and joy until that Friday. Until that Friday when everything is taken from her. Until that Friday when her whole group, the whole community, everybody's broken up and disperses, and she is alone again. The hope she had is lost. And it is dark. It's very dark for her. But while it was still dark, she discovers the empty tomb, and there is a man like a gardener in front of her, and she sees that it is him, and her temptation is to cling to him, to want to take him and go back to the way things were, to get the band back together again and go out on the road and gather all the crowds and do the miracles and the teaching and the shows and travel from place to place and all the fun, all the excitement. And Jesus says, don't hold on to me. There is no going back. Jesus is bringing about something new. There's something new that will change everything everywhere for everyone forever, and it has to keep moving forward. It has to go out from there into all of creation. There is no going back. Do not cling to me. Don't hold on to what was, but that is our temptation. In our grief, in our sorrow, in our regret, our fears, to long for what used to be. And over the last 3 years, we've all lost something. All of us have stood outside of a tomb, whether literally or figuratively, and had to say goodbye. Whether it was goodbye to friends or to family, or goodbye to a business or a job to a home. People say goodbye to churches. We said goodbye to the way things were, what normal used to be, and often the way we thought they were supposed to be, and all of it was just taken, ripped away from us. I mean, families missed out on weddings and funerals. I saw this over and over again as a pastor, gathering with just a small group of people, and as hopeful as maybe a wedding can be, still that feeling of regret, that nothing was as they thought it should be. Funerals where people missed out on grieving together, saying goodbye together. I saw it in the lives of my kids, that they missed out on the graduations and the parties and the dances and the dates and the fun and everything that time of their lives should have been. It wasn't. We all grieved something. Tensions, conflict, division. We missed out. So what about you? What have you lost? What are you tempted to cling to and hold on to? There is a time for grief. There is a time to weep, to mourn, time for sorrow. And for Mary, this was her time, and there she experiences Jesus in it, and he speaks to her tenderly, and he comforts her. And then there is a time to ask, now what? There is a resurrection to a new life, and it is a different life. It is not the past life. There is no bringing back the old life and the way things were. There's this author, Ken Davis, and he tells the story of a woman who one day she's in her kitchen and she looks out the window in her backyard and she sees her German shepherd with the neighbor's rabbit in its mouth, shaking it for all he's worth. And her family did not get along well with the neighbor's family, so she grabbed her broom from the kitchen, she bolted out the back door and walloped her dog as hard as she could until that dog dropped the rabbit and took off. But the rabbit was dead. And so she panicked. She grabbed the rabbit. She ran into the house. She ran some bath water. She gave the rabbit a bath. And then she blow-dried it and fluffed it back up and combed its hair so it looked like a rabbit again. And then snuck over into the neighbor's yard and put it back in its cage and propped it up and snuck back into the house. And then, sure enough, a couple hours later, she heard a blood-curdling scream from next door. And she was pretty sure she knew what it was. So she ran next door to find out. And sure enough, it was the neighbor looking in the rabbit cage, screaming. And she said, "What is it? What's the matter?" And the neighbor said, our rabbit. He died 2 weeks ago and we buried him, but now he's back." There is no fluffing back to life the old ways, what used to be. Some of it is laid in the tomb and it is there forever. It will not be resurrected. And our temptation can be to sit in the grief part and stay there, to hold on to what was, or to hold on to wishing what we think should be, and stay in the while it's still dark part and never move fully into the new life and new light part. So now what? How do you see reality? Do you look to one horizon and see the darkness? Or do you turn to the other and see the sun rising, bringing new life and new light over a new creation? Because the tomb that matters most is empty, even as some others around us are still full. See, here's something that I think is helpful in guiding us through this kind of tension. It's called the Stockdale Paradox. And this business and leadership author, a guy named Jim Collins, he wrote about this concept, and he named it after Admiral Jim Stockdale, who served in the Vietnam War, and then he was a prisoner of war over in Vietnam. And he went through some of the worst persecution and torture and suffering that you can imagine. It was terrible. And he, at the very same time, while he was going through this very dark period, at the very same time, he was determined to hold out hope for a brighter future no matter what. He was determined that he, even in the very worst moments, he could be a good man, a man of courage and character even then. And Collins writes about that, and he calls it the Stockdale paradox, this tension that's created, a contradiction of two opposing things, but when they're held in tension, they offer new truths, new ways of seeing, new ways of being, and living into reality as it really is. And so here are the two parts to the Stockdale paradox. The first one is to be able to accept the brutal facts of the current situation. Accept all the ways that it is still dark, that there are tombs around us. That is a reality. But at the very same time, hold unwavering faith in the ability to prevail. That there is a new creation bursting forth out of the old. There is a new and glorious life and light that is coming that will resurrect us and carry us forward no matter what. That you can lose everything that matters. You can lose the people you love. You can lose the dreams you hold. You can lose the future you long for. You can even lose the use of your body and your limbs. And yet still hold on to this unwavering faith in the power of resurrection and the power of the new creation that you are a part of. I went to seminary with a guy named Bill who lived this out. Bill had been in the Air Force, and he was at seminary at the time studying to go back as a chaplain, and he told me his story, how he basically lived out the Stockdale paradox. That one day he was staying home with their two young kids while his wife went out to get groceries. And not long after she left, there was a knock at the door, and when he opened it, it was a couple of RCMP officers telling him there'd been an accident and his wife didn't make it. And the next days and weeks for him were just a blur of tears and grief and sorrow and sadness and asking, now what? He had to tell his little boys that their mom was gone, and he gave up his career in the Air Force to be with them. And he said that strangely, through all of that, he said what it felt like was that God himself was reaching his hand down from heaven and holding his hand and guiding him along at every single step. Kind of the way that Mary meets Jesus in her grief in the garden. And for Bill, in those days, he said it was in that closeness that he discovered this new and different passion for ministry, that he found a new desire to help hurting people. It was there that he experienced the closeness of God, the intimacy with God, the power of God, in ways that he just couldn't have otherwise. And it changed everything for him. It reshaped his faith. That even while it was still dark, there was a light shining that gave him another way forward. And we need to be able to live in the tension of the Stockdale paradox, or else we miss out on the real life he promises us. If we're just clinging to what could have been or what we think should have been, we will miss out on the real life available to us, the real life of new creation bursting forth. So do not cling to the past, or else you will not be able to follow the command that Jesus gives Mary here. That really is, it's the command that shapes her life from that point going forward. It is the command that comes to each and every one of us. And in verse 17, he says, do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Do not hold on. Go instead. That even while it's still dark, go instead in the direction that the light leads you. And see, for Mary, Jesus is telling her, go to the disciples and tell them about his resurrection. Tell them about his coming ascension. And do not miss what he is asking her to do here. See, in ancient Rome, ancient Israel, where this is happening, women did not have status as credible legal witnesses. If you had been accused of a crime, and your only alibi was that, well, she can testify to where I was, you were out of luck, because her testimony would not be valid for you. Women weren't considered to be trustworthy or able to give any kind of accurate testimony. They were not credible witnesses. And never mind a woman like Mary, whose past includes some kind of time under demon possession. And yet still, Jesus is calling her, he is telling her, go and be the very first person to bring the most important news the world has ever heard to the men who are now charged with taking that news out into the whole rest of the world for all time. The news that death is defeated, that even while it is still dark, light has overcome the darkness. Real life is available to everyone who believes this. Jesus is giving her this mission, that she is not going to go back. It is time to go forward, and she will testify. She is not the right gender. She doesn't have the right qualifications. But the God of all creation, Jesus in the garden, is commissioning her to do the one thing that the world tells her she can't do. Now, how about you? Do not cling to a past, what was. Don't cling to your shame. Don't cling to your lack of qualifications or your disqualifications. Don't cling to the faulty beliefs about who you are and what you shouldn't do or can't do. Go instead. Even while it is still dark, even because it is still dark. It is in the darkness that a world needs to see the light shining in you and through you to help them find the way. You get to tell them the best news they've ever heard. You get to use your words, maybe to tell some of your story. Maybe you get to be like the prodigal. Tell them the ways. I once was lost, and now I'm found. I once was dead, and now I live. I once was blind, but by the light I see, and I know the way. This is the news that has come into the world, and it changes everything, everywhere, for everyone, forever. This is the direction of your true calling. All of us. Every single person has this. In Christian terms, what we call your calling. See, here Jesus calls Mary by name, and then he sends her off into mission. Your calling is the way that God has uniquely designed you and empowered you to send you out and meet the needs and the opportunities in the world around you, so that others get to hear this powerful news that changes things powerfully. Some of us get to use our words to do this. All of us, we do it in deed, in action. All of us are called to do this with great love, the love of Jesus Christ that led him to give his own life on the cross. If you want to go deeper into this, you need to come to Next Steps after the service and listen to what Jeanette has to say. It's all about discovering calling. Notice how Mary realizes that it's Jesus who's the one in front of her. It's when he calls her by her name, Mary. And he actually doesn't even use, Mary is the anglicized version of her name. The Greek form would be Maria, and he doesn't even use Maria. He actually calls her by the Hebrew form, Miriam. Miriam. Just by using that form of her name, he's giving her a hint of what her life is to hold, because it is Miriam that when the Israelites crossed through the Red Sea and got to the other side, Miriam, the brother of Moses in the Old Testament, that when they arrive and they're moving towards the promised land, they're moving once again towards a new land full of hope and promise and goodness, new life. It is Miriam that sings the song that gives them the words that leads the way to the new life. And Mary will do what Miriam did. See, anytime you take any kind of sales training, anytime you take any kind of, you read a book on influence or something, often you'll come across the strategy that tells you that if you really want to influence somebody, you need to learn their name, memorize their name, and use it frequently. And when you hear this, it can be kind of cheesy sounding, or it sounds manipulative. But using a person's name is powerful. We all learn this when we're kids, when we hear a parent call us by our full name. As soon as you hear first, middle, and last name, you know it is time to pay attention. Two of our boys are named after my dad's grandfathers. We have Corello and Jude. And Jude is actually not his first name. His first name is Alonzo. My dad's grandfathers were Corello and Alonzo. But he goes by Jude. But Friday night in our home, I heard Krista summon Jude by Alonzo. And then I knew it was time to pay attention. Even I was like, oh no, what happened? This is the power of using the name. When someone remembers and calls you by name. It says so much. It tells you they see you. It tells you they notice you. It tells you you matter to them. It tells you they know you. And so when Jesus calls Mary by her name here, he's not scolding her. He is comforting her. He is reassuring her. He is sending her forward. He is telling her, I know the dreams that you had. I know how good the way things used to be, how they were. And Mary, I also know there is a world waiting for you to live out your calling, to go and give them the news that guides the way for them. I am calling you by name. This is your true calling. Even if no one else believes in you to be a witness, I do. So do not cling to the past. Go instead and live in the direction of your true calling. See, God is calling each and every one of us towards this destiny that He has planned for you, a life of good works that He intends for you to live out. Even the Latin word for this, vocation, that we use, the word vocation, comes from this Latin word, voca, the word for voice. Our belief about vocation is that it's the voice of God that is summoning you, calling you forward. This is the God who knows all things. This is the God who the Scripture tells us He knows how far east is from west. This is the God who knows the number of stars in the sky and the number of the grains of sand on the seashore. This is the God who even knows the identity of the person who shot JFK. And He knows you. He knows when you eat your Smarties if you eat the red ones last. He knows when you put your pants on in the morning which leg goes in first. He knows if you're not wearing any pants. He knows all the things about you that you don't even know. The things you're really afraid of. All the mistakes that you don't want anyone else to know. He knows your highest hopes and your biggest dreams. He knows what makes you laugh. He knows your name, and He notices you, and He knows you, and He cares for you, and He is calling you. He believes in you even when everybody else does not. And so maybe like Mary, no one else would have picked her, and maybe the same way nobody else would pick you because of what they know about you. Well, God knows all the things you hope they never find out, and yet still He calls you. So where is He sending you? Who is it He's sending you to? He wants you to share the best news the world has ever heard, the news that changes everything, everywhere, for everyone, forever. And the promise is that wherever He calls you and sends you, He will be there with you in grace, in power. In Matthew 28, Jesus sends out the rest of the disciples, similar to how He did with Mary, and with these words from Matthew 28. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And this promise, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Back in the 1960s, the mayor of Chicago was a guy named Richard Daley. And Richard Daley was famous for his very sharp wit, very powerful intellect. He was a very powerful leader. But he also had this enormous ego that made him pretty much impossible to work with. And one fall, one of his speechwriters came to him and said, I asked for a raise. And Daley's response to him was, I'm not going to give you a raise. You should count it big enough privilege that you get to work for me, a great American hero. And so that speechwriter did keep working for him for a little while, until November that year, and then he gave his notice at the beginning of November that he was leaving, and Daley insisted he stay on long enough to finish his speech for him for a Veterans Day event he was speaking at, Remembrance Day here in Canada. It was going to be a big event. There was going to be nationwide press coverage. There would be a large group of veterans there, hundreds of people gathered, and he wanted his speech to be perfect, so he insisted that speechwriter stay on to make it so, and the writer did. So that day, the crowds gathered, and Daley got up to read his speech. And now Daley was also famous for never reading through his speeches ahead of time. He just liked to wing it in the moment and go with the flow. So on that day, he starts to read that speechwriter's text about how precious the service of the veterans was, how valuable they were to him personally. And he talked about how everybody else in society had forgotten about them and moved on from their service and sacrifice, but not him. And to prove it, he was announcing a 17-point plan that would take effect at the federal, state, and local level to ensure that the veterans were cared for and honored in the way that they deserved. And the crowd was hanging on every word. The press wanted to know about the 17-point plan. The veterans really wanted to know about this 17-point plan. Hundreds of other people were wondering, what will this 17-point plan hold? And so was Daly, and he was really eager to turn the page and find out. And when he did, he flipped it over and it read, "You're on your own now, you great American hero." The promise of God to you is you are never on your own. That he is with you. Not because of what you've done or didn't do, but because of who he is. That Jesus ascended into heaven so that he could send his Spirit to be with you for all time. That this good news has come into the world that has changed everything, everywhere, for everyone, forever, and that God himself has not forgotten you. He knows you, he is calling you, and he is with you even to the very end of the age. And so now what? What does this mean? It means that even while it is still dark in so many ways in our world, that is true, that Jesus is calling you to be a beacon of light in a dark world that needs it. Not because you're qualified, not because you've earned it, but because he loves you and he is with you no matter what. So that even one day when you were laid into your own tomb, he will be there reaching out his hand to guide you forward into the next step of your eternal life with him. And it has already begun. It has already begun. And so may you too, now what? May you also follow the voice of your rabbi. As you go out from this building today, you'll go back out into a world that even while the light shines, there is still darkness. But there is a light that cannot be extinguished. There is a light that guides the way. And as you walk out, you'll walk under the sign over the doors that says, "The world is our parish." There is a new creation and a world that needs to hear. And so it is a privilege to be able to send you back out into that world, remembering that it was on the cross that Jesus Christ is reconciling the world to himself. Through the cross, God is not angry with you. God forgives you. And it is his joy, his delight to extend the forgiveness to you that he purchased with his own life. So as you go, may the Lord bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and lift his countenance upon you and give you the peace we all long for. Have an excellent week, and we'll see you in First Steps.